Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Javon Harrington, back to hit you another video. And today, we're going to be continuing Neon Genesis Evangelion, The Star of Hope, Part 3. If you haven't already, check out yesterday's video, that being What If Naruto Was the Avatar Part 2, along with other series that we have on Power Core Productions. As always, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so that you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions in podcastings. Always make sure that you are subscribed so that you never miss a video or an upload, and make sure you watch that community tab like a hawk. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into today's video. So as always, sit back, relax, and let's start the show. With the fifth angel now defeated, and with Rei still needing some time to recover, Misato had decided to take the boys along with Jason out to the Pacific Ocean, where they would meet with a naval fleet that was coming in from Germany, that were teleporting none other than the second unit, Evangelion Unit 2. The boys would all be in awe as they arrived across the ocean's shores, flying on a helicopter, Jason getting a chance to explore a bit of this Earth a little bit more, as he had been a part of an international peace conference in his younger years, although as far as any other traveling he had done besides that, he hadn't gone very far. As the group would arrive, they would touch down on one of the ships, Misato giving her own clearance as well as filling out a few other forms of paperwork before the transaction could be made official. In the meantime, the three young rangers would search around the ship, all exploring and happy to finally be outside of Tokyo 3. Kensuke especially, as he was a big fan of naval ships and battling airplanes and things of that nature, as that was his specialty after all. Shinji just felt a little unnerved by it all, not that it really bothered him in the grand scheme of things. As the three boys made their way on deck, Toji's hat would go flying off until it would be stepped on by a young girl, who would be towering above them. The young girl around their age, with long flowing red hair, tied in two pigtails on either side of her. She would introduce herself as Asuka Langley Soryu. Of course, as she had stepped on Toji's hat and a gust of wind blew by, it gave him a brief peek at what was underneath, causing the Green Ranger to be slapped repeatedly. She would ask if he enjoyed the view, and saying that that was nothing more but premium. Of course, Toji had to respond in kind by flashing her himself, only to receive multiple slaps as well. Misato would then go out to greet the boys to the second child, Asuka happy to finally meet them, or at least she felt as though they should be happy to meet her. However, the only one that truly caught her attention was Shinji, as he was the first child. She would ask if he were up to par when it came to being an Eva pilot, and that she would ask more as to what he was in particular, that being whatever this Ranger was supposed to be. They had seen the footage of Shinji in action piloting the Phoenix Zord, and from what she could see, she wasn't truly impressed. She would remark that Shinji had to go with something off-brand because he wasn't good enough to pilot in Evangelion. Shinji trying his best to ignore her as he couldn't understand what brought on this attitude of hers. Misato thought that all of this was rather funny in her own right until a young man who she hadn't seen in a long time suddenly appeared, this being none other than Kaji, as he would remark that it was nice to see Misato again, before making his way over and meeting the other young Rangers, as well as shaking hands with Jason. Misato's color would completely drain from her face at the sight of Kaji, as he was the last person she was expecting to see on this vessel. Kaji explained that he was in charge of making sure that Ava Unit 2 got to Japan safely, so he just decided he would tag along. Of course, Misato was not really in the mood for Kaji and his antics, as the two of them had a rather long and pretty complicated history. As the group would make their way to the lower decks, everyone being stuck inside of an elevator, Kaji would try to make small talk, although Misato wasn't having it. With everyone cramped and unable to move, Misato and Asuka would both yell in unison to get their hands out of a certain area, although Toji and Kaji would both respond that they didn't really have a choice. Shinji trying his best to ignore everything, and Jason trying his best to hold in a laugh. Misato only able to turn her head slightly to give him a glare, and Jason would quietly shut up. As everyone made their way to the lower cafe and area where they would stop to have a drink, Kaji would ask Jason and Shinji about Misato and how she was. For Jason, he would make the comment of if she were still wild in bed, causing Jason to choke a little bit as he wasn't expecting something like that, understanding full well that he was just trying to tease them. Of course, Jason hadn't really had any sort of interaction with Misato like that. After all, even though they shared an apartment as he had nowhere else to go, he pretty much just stayed in his own room and to himself. Whenever he wasn't jogging around the streets of Tokyo 3, training or helping with the capture of the Cogs or the defeat of the Angels, he and Misato's relationship didn't go much farther than that. And as for Shinji, he didn't really think much of it either. Although Kaji would ask more about the Rangers as a whole, along with Toji and Kinsuke, asking about their morphers and about just what a Power Ranger even was. Jason would try to explain it in the simplest of terms, but Kaji would be fascinated, and this would have Asuka's attention as well, especially with Shinji, as she just couldn't seem to take her eyes off of him. Kaji would ask Asuka if she thought of anything of Shinji, and she would say that she wasn't really impressed, stating that her Evangelion would be greater than any of those so-called Zords, and that she couldn't understand the idea of 5 separate robots coming together to form one. In the end, she was her own one-woman show, and she wasn't going to be outstaged by any Build-A-Robots. In the meantime, unknown to the ships heading through the Pacific Ocean, another angel was on its way, soaring under the waters below. It would be detected by the ship's radars and by the Admiral, the other fleets preparing their torpedoes in an attempt to defeat the Angel, stubborn to the idea of Evangelion being used as Earth's last hope. Misato would try to warn the Admiral that it was best to use the Angels in this instance, but he wasn't hearing it. Continuing on with his assault, it would prove to be pointless as the Angel would start to sink ships left and right, forcing them into a corner as they had no idea what they were going to do in this instance. Asuka and Shinji would see what was happening from the outside. Asuka, as she had taken Shinji alone to show off her Ava Unit 2, bragging about its greatness. She would remark that it was time to go to battle, as she would slip on into her Ava pilot suit. She would ask Shinji to put on an extra one that she had as well, although Shinji would remark that he didn't really need to, as he had his own uniform with him, and he wasn't going to dress in something like that. Asuka would look on in amazement as Shinji would take out his Zeonizer, the two halves slot on both sides of his wrist, as he would put them together in the call of Zeo Ranger 5 Red echoing through the chambers. In a flash of red, Asuka would see firsthand just what Shinji's Ranger form looked like, and she had to admit, she did like the color red, remarking that maybe he had some sense of style, before telling him to hop into the cockpit. The two of them would go into the Ava plug before eventually being inserted into Ava Unit 2. As Ava Unit 2 would then engage with its power cable, it would go into battle against the Angel. Shinji putting in word to Nerve to have the Red Phoenix Zord shot out as soon as possible. With the Zord left in the hangar, it would start its descent before flying out to meet them, hopefully not arriving too soon after. In the meantime, Kaji would be alone in his own private bunker, as he would get a call from Gendo Ikari. Gendo asking him to keep an eye on things, as it was his job to make sure that the unit made it to Tokyo 3 safely. He would also ask him to keep an eye on his son and the Rangers, and Kaji would make sure to do so. Misato would tell Shinji to watch over Asuka while she was inside of the Eva unit until his Phoenix Zord would arrive, telling the other boys to stay on standby in case anything happened, Jason also at the ready. It would be pointless to try to call out their Zords here, as in the waters they weren't all that in depth. Shinji's Zord, being the only one that could fly, could only serve of any use to them at this point, although they had to make sure they stayed on guard, in the event that the cogs were to show up by any chance. Kaji in the meantime would slip away from the action, keeping himself safe from a distance, but watching on to see what would happen. Asuka would engage with the Angel in Eva Unit 2, even though she only had the prototype weapons at the moment, and the power cable was only good for 5 minutes. She believed that it would be more than enough to defeat the Angel in close quarters combat. Although, her brashness and her underestimating of the enemy proved to be more than what she could handle, as the sea-like Angel would arrive from the waters, dragging Eva Unit 2 into the depths below. The others would look on, wondering what they should do at that moment. Misato coming up with a plan to use 2 of the spare ships in order to use them as torpedoes inside of the Angel's mouth. However, Asuka would have to try to pry it open, as her arm was caught inside of the jaws of the Eva, using it as a way to try to battle against the Angel. Asuka tried her best to pilot her Eva unit as best she could, Shinji doing his best to assist her with his added strength while in Ranger form. He would grab a hold of the steering inside of Eva Unit 2, assisting Asuka in prying open the jaws of the Angel. Eventually allowing them to slip free, he would get the notice that his Phoenix Zord was in the skies. Shinji would exit out of the pilot side of the pod, Asuka telling him not to leave her there by herself, but Shinji would remark that he was going to be back for her and that she just needed to hold on. Shinji would exit out of the Eva before shooting up into the sky itself, as a ladder from the top of his Phoenix Zord would come down into the ocean, Shinji hopping aboard before climbing inside. He had never actually thought if he could use it underwater, but using it in a way of streaming like a jet, Shinji would plunge the Phoenix Zord into the waters below. While he didn't have complete control, he had just enough, as he would arrive next to Eva Unit 2, Asuka getting a chance to see the Zord up close and personal. She again had to admit she liked the color red, and she felt as though Shinji could be a good use to her as a sidekick. Shinji would use his Zord to attach to the back of Eva Unit 2, as the power cord had been disabled from the back of the Eva. Using his own Zord, he would use it as a way of a jetpack for Eva Unit 2 to soar under the waters. As Eva Unit 2 would hold open the mouth of the Angel, it would allow for the 2 other spare ships to be plunged into its mouth, as Asuka would hang on to the Zord itself while Shinji would use it to fly into the air, pulling it from out of the waters, as the 2 ships that had been lodged inside of the Angel's mouth would engage and unleash their entire payload of torpedoes and missiles, destroying it from the inside and averting any more disaster. Shinji would use the best that he could with his piloting in the Phoenix Zord, taking Eva Unit 2 and safely sitting it on one of the ship's decks. Asuka getting out, although she wouldn't be too thankful, telling Shinji that he needed to be more careful if he was going to do something so reckless, because the last thing she needed was him destroying her precious Eva. Shinji tried his best to ignore that as he got out of his own Phoenix Zord, the others checking and making sure that he was okay, although he assured them that he was just fine. Jason would tell Shinji that he was proud of him and that he was able to handle the situation well, showing that he and the others were growing in their training each and every day. The group would eventually arrive back to Tokyo 3, where Eva Unit 2 would be taken into NERV headquarters and be placed into the workshop along with the other Evangelion, as they all were being fitted for repairs in the lieu of the next attack. In the meantime, Kaji would arrive to the meeting with Gendo. Gendo had a meeting with the committee, so he couldn't stay for long. However, before leaving, Kaji would slip him the object that he had been looking for, a precious artifact known as the first human, Adam. What Gendo believed could be the key to mankind's salvation. Although now Kaji could see that inside of Genji's eyes, he was a bit different. Gendo had a look of doubt for a moment. Kaji would ask what was the cause of such a doubt, and Gendo would assure him that he had none. Kaji would make the off comment that maybe it was because of the Rangers. Was Ranger power better than the Evangelion in the long run? Gendo wouldn't answer this, as he would leave. As some time would pass, Asuka would readjust to her life in Tokyo 3. Having her things moved in with Misato, Jason, and Shinji, the apartment now became even more cramped than it was before. Asuka would be the talk of the town in school, drawing the eyes of all of the students. The other Rangers weren't really too fond of Miss Perfect and Perfection, as Asuka would seem to love the attention that she was getting. Among many of them, Rei would finally return back to school as well, Asuka getting her chance to meet with the first child, the two of them not really seeing eye to eye on many things. Asuka would ask if they wanted to be friends, but Rei really wouldn't pay her any mind at all. Asuka deciding that Rei wasn't really someone she was going to get along with. Eventually, it would come time for the Eva units to be used once again. Of course, Shinji wasn't really too fond of doing so, but in the end he didn't have a choice. The Zords were meant to be used in conjunction with the Evangelion, so he always had to balance out between using an Eva and using his Zord. Although Shinji had to admit, every time he got inside of an Evangelion, it never felt right. It never felt natural. It felt as if there was something to it that just wasn't meant to be. Eva Units 1 and 2 would be deployed as the 7th Angel would appear. Along with a small fleet, they would go to engage against the Angel. Asuka, wanting to take the spotlight and not liking the idea of sharing her debut battle with Shinji, would go in with a single strike, slicing the Angel in half and believing that the battle had been won. Although what ended up happening would shock her, Shinji, and everyone else at NERV. Instead of the Angel being defeated as it was split in half, it would instead turn into two separate beings. Before standing completely still and stationary, the Angels would launch one single attack, throwing off Shinji and Asuka, respectively, sending their Eva units crashing into the sides of two different mountains, buried waist deep. Back in the meeting room, the lieutenant commander would be less than pleased, telling the two that they needed to get their act together and get ready, as in less than 10 days, the Angel was going to be back and operational, and they needed to plan out their coordinated assault if they were going to take it down once and for all. Misato even remarking that if Gendo had been around to see this, then she probably would have been fired for this altercation. From the data that they had gathered on the Angel, it was believed that the only way it could be defeated was to strike both cores inside of the split beings at the same time. It had to be done in perfect synchronization, and if they were off by even just a millimeter, then it could result in it being an absolute failure. In order to prepare the two pilots for the upcoming assault, it was decided that they needed to work on their rhythm, doing everything in sync. Misato buying even a dancing game to allow them to get their moves down. Although at the start, the two of them couldn't really get it together at all. Even some of the other Rangers would be watching and laughing at the two of them trying to work things out. Rei would instead work with Shinji, the two of them showing that they really could work together, causing Asuka to become a bit jealous. It seemed as though Shinji was always full of new tricks, always one-upping her in every which way, causing her to storm off in anger as she decided to blow off some steam heading to the convenience store. Shinji would decide to follow after her as it was getting rather late at night. As Asuka was going out to buy some of her own personal items, Shinji would come along not too far behind her, asking if she was okay. Asuka? Don't tell me, third child. I already know. But if you are, then it's just that why do I have to work with you? Of all people... You know, Asuka, we should be a... No, I don't want to be a team with you. I can do this by myself. I was born to be a pilot. I don't need to be looked after or babysat by someone like you, Ikari. Asuka, you think that everyone's trying to put you down, but it's really not like that. Oh yeah? Well, if everything else is so perfect for you, why don't you just go do the perfect operation with Miss First Child? Because that's not the plan. Asuka, we're supposed to be saving mankind and defeating the angels. So why are you always trying to be like this? Because I am supposed to be the best. It's what I was born to do, Shinji. You wouldn't understand it all. How could you ever understand? You just get by on dumb luck. You know what? You're right. I do get by on dumb luck. Huh? You know something? When I first piloted Ava Unit 1, I thought I was going to die, you know. If Jason hadn't saved me, I don't know what would have happened. Is that so? And just tell me, why do you put so much faith in this Jason guy anyway? You don't even know anything about him. For all we know, he could be an enemy. Jason's been helping us this whole time. Oh, really? And just how exactly is he going to help us? Because he's a hero. And a hero? Just where did he even come from? Who is he? Shinji would take a deep breath before telling Asuka that it would be a long story. The two of them deciding to walk over to a park bench, Shinji would explain Jason and his story, telling of everything he had been through. Asuka was a bit taken aback for words. She had no idea that something like that could have even happened. At first, she didn't want to believe it. Although, after all, when you're a young child and you're piloting Evangelion to battle against angels, anything can be possible. Asuka would, in her own way, apologize, handing Shinji one of the snacks that she had bought, telling him that they were going to have to make sure that they worked together, although he was going to follow her lead. Shinji would simply shake his head as the two of them would start to become more and more in sync, doing a lot of their mundane tasks together, working in perfect coordination. Just one night, a couple of days before the launch of the attack against the Angel, Misato had to work late at night at Nerve headquarters, and Jason had gotten word that there was COG activity somewhere in the far regions of Japan. He had been given his own squad to go out and fight against the COGs. Using his Golden Ranger form, he would lead the way. He decided that he wouldn't be gone for too long, so he told Shinji and the others to watch after one another and make sure that everyone was safe until he got back. During this night, Asuka and Shinji would be home alone. Shinji would be laying in his bed, looking up at the ceiling, his headphones over his ears as he would be listening to his Walkman. As his door would slide open, he would sit up to see Asuka standing there. Earlier in the night, Asuka made it very clear that she didn't want to be disturbed at all, but now she was in his room. Shinji would remove his headphones as he would ask her if something was wrong. Asuka would simply sit down in front of him, not saying a word in that moment. Can I help you, Asuka? Shut up. Oh, man. Why do you do it? Huh? Why do I what? Why do you pilot the Eva? If you don't like it, why do you do it? I'm not sure. Of course you would give me a stupid answer like that. I don't think it's a stupid answer, Asuka. It's just what? Well, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not all that comfortable inside of the Eva, but someone has to do it. But if you don't like it, then why do it? It just seems so ridiculous. Well, Asuka, don't you think life is about doing things that sometimes you don't want to do, but that you have to do? I suppose. And being a ranger, do you like piloting the Zords instead? Well, I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel comfortable. There's a certain element to it that I really just can't describe. In all honesty, when I'm inside of it, it's just everything seems to work out fine. And well, I've come to learn recently that, well, sometimes you just gotta learn to step up. That's funny coming from you. I know. To be honest, I've thought about running away a lot. Sometimes I really just don't want to do it. I don't like it. But if I don't, then who will? I mean, I'm one of the few people on Earth with this power, with the capabilities to do what most can't. Sure, I'm not obligated to be a ranger. I'm not even obligated to be an Eva pilot. I know I'm free to leave whenever I want. I have no issue with that at all. And sometimes I think it would be better if I did, but what? If I left, then what would happen to the others? Misato, Ritsuko, Jason, Toji, Kensuke, Rei, the people at Nerve, they've all put their faith in me. And I have to be able to repay that any way that I can. My life is what I choose to make it, so in the end, I think I can do anything as long as it's my choice. Asuka would be taken aback at Shinji's words. This wasn't really something she was expecting from him. She always thought he was weak, thought she was a wimp. She always thought that he couldn't really amount to anything, but she was now seeing a different side of him. And unknown to Shinji, he was being influenced in more ways than one. Without saying a word, the two of them would just fall asleep together on the futon, both of them making it very clear not to invade the other one's privacy. However, as Shinji would sleep, his mind would go into a fog as he would see a vision. It was a bit blurry, and he couldn't quite make out what was happening. He was inside of Nerve headquarters, and he was looking at a screen. He would see Asuka inside of Eva Unit 2. The Eva Unit's head would have a spike piercing through its head. He would hear Asuka's screams, her pain and agony. He could feel it all. Before eventually on the screen, more angels would arrive, driving spears all through Eva Unit 2's body. Shinji would collapse on the ground in complete and utter shock, as he would hear Misato's voice, her sobbing and tears echoing through the room. Asuka is dead. Shinji would awaken from his dream, looking down to see that Asuka was sleeping peacefully, just fine. In his own cold sweat, Shinji would go to the bathroom to splash water on his face, trying his best to figure out what these visions were. They felt too real, they couldn't be fake, but it hadn't happened. What was happening? Was he seeing the future? Was it something that could be? He wasn't entirely sure. Eventually the day of the operation would come, and Shinji and Asuka would perform the attack in Eva Units 1 and 2, synchronized to the music that both of them would be listening to. They performed their duties flawlessly. The coordinated assault went perfectly and the Angels were defeated. However, in the ensuing blast, both of the units would be shot into another crater side of the mountain, the both of them being stuck over one another as they tried their best to get out of the rubble. Jason, in the meantime, was far across on the other side of Japan, as they had finally come across the coordinates for where they believed the cogs were. Jason and his team of nerve soldiers would arrive, only to find that the enemy was not there. It would be in that exact moment, when it seemed as though everything was peaceful, that the situation changed. As Shinji and Asuka were getting out of Eva Units 1 and 2, as the two robots had been entangled with one another inside of the crater, as they got out, they would look up and see that around the outer edge of the crater they were completely surrounded. Shinji? What are those things up there? What the? They're cogs. Asuka, get down. What? What are cogs? Asuka, get down. Asuka could hear the change in Shinji's voice. His tone was completely different. Without even thinking, she immediately obeyed his orders. Among the cogs was one that looked different in particular. This being, clad in blue armor, he seemed to be robotic in design. He looked to be the leader of these cogs. He must have been one of the generals that were part of the Machine Empire, the ones that Jason was hunting. So, you are in possession of one of the 6 Zeo shards. And who are you? My name. I am General Blue, one of the 5 generals of the Machine Empire, in service to His Majesty Lord Draken. In accordance with his will, I, along with my counterparts, have been commissioned to take all parts of the Zeo crystal and retrieve it back for His Majesty. We of the Machine Empire will not fail. You have 2 options now, young man. Hand over your morpher, or suffer the consequences. The cogs readied their weapons. Asuka wasn't sure of what to do. The Evas were down and not usable. Misato and the others were worried about what they should do at this moment. As they were telling Jason what was happening, he would give them specific orders not to engage. Misato was to keep all the other Rangers back at base and to not leave. Jason would hop into one of the nerve jets, flying at top speeds towards Tokyo 3's second section. As Shinji stood amongst the army of cogs, around 20 altogether, including the general, he would take out his morpher and prepare for battle. Let's do this. Zeo Ranger 5, red. Shinji would morph into the red Zeo Ranger. pulling his sword from his holster. The cogs were all prepared as they descended upon the inner crater. Shinji rushing out to face them, slicing and taking down as many of the cogs as he could, his practice and his training coming into full view. Asuka was now seeing another side of Shinji, something that she had never seen before. This wasn't the boy that was shy and timid, the boy that just let her boss him around. No, this was a Shinji that was completely different. Just what changed in him? As Shinji defeated many of the cogs in battle, taking a few hits himself, he would eventually mow through and defeat them all, as the general would descend slowly to face him. Well, it seems as though you have had some training. At least you won't bore me. You work for Lord Draken, right? I do. We of the 5 generals of the Machine Empire serve under our master. He is the one who will become the god of rangers in this world. All who oppose him shall be destroyed. This is your last chance, Red Ranger. Well, I don't plan on giving up this morpher so easily. Then you will die, foolish. Shinji would rush towards the general, his sword in a large sweeping motion as he would bring it down over his head. The general would block with his arm before throwing Shinji to the side, as he would pull out a blade of his own. Shinji would quickly re-pick up his sword as the two would clash with one another. In terms of battle and combat experience, it was obvious that the general had the upper hand, but Shinji was just barely holding his own. This wasn't like fighting the cogs. This guy was on a completely different level. As the general would continue in his battle against Shinji, it was obvious that he had the upper hand. Shinji would be kicked around and beaten over and over. Asuka watching on from a distance as Shinji tried to fight off against the general. The other rangers at Nerve headquarters wasn't sure of what they should do. Toji and Kensuke wanted to leave out immediately, but Misato had given them strict orders not to, shutting down the hangar so that they couldn't escape. An argument would be breaking out amongst them all. Rei would look on worried as well, as she didn't want Shinji to suffer like this. Even she wanted to do something if she could. Shinji was out there all by himself fighting against General Blue. As the two of them would engage more into their combat, Shinji would lose the upper hand, however small he might have had. He would attempt to take cover amongst the rubble, the general blasting a few of his bolts towards him, Shinji just barely getting out of the way. Asuka would watch on from her hiding spot. She could tell that Shinji couldn't hold out much longer, but she wondered if there was anyone else that could help him, if there was anyone who could do something. Jason was hurrying as fast as he could. Already in his Gold Ranger form, he knew he would have to jump out of the jet as soon as he got overhead. He only hoped that Shinji could hold out just long enough. The fight, however, would only become more and more dire. Shinji would slowly start to be beaten down, his suit being torn, his visor being cracked. With every hit, more blood would start to cough from his mouth. He could feel that he couldn't last much longer, as the general would start to beat down upon him more ferociously, making his best to make him suffer. Shinji would look over to Asuka, telling her to run. The general would turn his head to see Asuka hiding amongst the rubble, asking if she had a morpher as well. Shinji would yell that she didn't and that the fight was between them. That's the difference between you and I. You humans, your sentiment, your compassion, it is nothing but weakness. A weakness that we machines do not share. The general would point his saber towards Asuka, preparing to blast and blow her away. Before he could, Shinji would get up and grab him by the arm, diverting the attack just enough to shoot off in another direction. Shinji would hold him as best he could as the general would take his free hand and punch him across the face. His helmet starting to crack more and more as Shinji would be beaten into the ground. Asuka, get out of here! Oh, you idiot! Just stop! You can't keep fighting! Asuka, get out of here! The general would grab Shinji by the throat before throwing him into the ground once again. Taking his sword, he would lift it above his head with the blade pointed down at him. Shinji would grab his blaster from his holster, shooting the general directly in the eye, blinding him just long enough for him to sweep his legs. As Shinji would pick up his sword, he would go in for a stabbing strike. However, before he could land it, the general would thrust his blade right into his gut. Shinji would yell in abject horror. Everyone at Nerve, their breaths being taken away at what they were seeing. As Shinji fell to the ground, in his battered and beaten state, Asuka yelled out into the heavens for someone, anyone to help them. Just then, in a flash of gold, Jason would touch down in the area, holding out his staff to the general. The two would lock eyes with one another before engaging in the fight. For Asuka, she didn't even pay attention to what was happening, as she rushed over to Shinji's side. She would turn him over to see the blood that was being lost from him. Large amounts of blood. She would try her best to press his wound to stop it. Everything would go into a daze for her. She couldn't even remember what happened next. Eventually blacking out, she would awaken in the hospital of Nerve headquarters. Everyone was waiting outside, Jason and the others all respectively. As they looked up, they would see that they were in front of the ER room, with the light in showing that an operation was in procedure. Misato would explain what happened to Asuka. After she had gone into a state of shock, Jason had managed to fight off General Blue, until he was able to escape. From what they were able to gather from the fight itself, it was made apparent that the general had also been after something else. He had used some type of device and gotten schematics on Ava Units 1 and half of the schematics for Ava Unit 2. They were able to tell that a copy of the schematics had been made, and that whatever the generals were planning, it more than likely involved the Ava and potentially the Angels. They needed to be hunted down as soon as possible, and Jason made it his point to make sure that he would confront the generals and defeat them once and for all. Eventually the operation would be done and the doctors would come out, telling them that they had successfully stabilized Shinji, although he would be out of commission for a brief time. Everyone would take turns visiting him to make sure that he was okay, although right now he was unresponsive. Misato was a bit distraught herself. She truly did care for Shinji, and she didn't want things to end like this. She knew she had to do a better job at leading them, and for Jason, he needed to do a better job at training. These Rangers had to be prepared for whatever came next, angel or machine. Finally, the last one to be in the room alone with Shinji would be Asuka. Asuka looking down at his prone body, seeing the bandages over the scar of where he had been stabbed, remembering how he fought desperately to try to save her. So, you really are a big dummy. You dummy, 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 dummy. How is he? Jason would ask as he walked into the room next to her. It's all my fault. Asuka, it's not... I should have... I wish I could have... I don't... I understand. No one's blaming you, Asuka. Jason would put his hand on her shoulder. This is the life of a ranger. What? This is what all rangers go through. We all know that this is something that can happen to us. Your team... That's right. I watched my whole team get taken out in front of my eyes. I was powerless to stop it. And it eats me up every night. How do I get through it? To be honest, it's not as easy as you think it is. In the end, I'm only human. I can only do what I'm capable of doing. For every life I save, there are others who I can. But in the end, I can only keep moving forward. That's the only thing we all can do. As the two stood in silence for a brief period, Asuka allowing her tears to fall softly. She had now made up her mind. You guys need one more ranger, don't you? Asuka? Well, it's obvious that this dummy's gonna need someone to watch his back. He can't do it himself. And it'd be irresponsible of me to not give my assistance. After all, I'm the best Ava pilot there is. I can easily be the best ranger. I'll do a better job than he ever could. I see. Well, we do need one more ranger. Are you sure you're up for the task? What kind of question is that? I'm Asuka Langley Soryu. I can do anything. This concludes Neon Genesis Evangelion: The Star of Hope, Part 3. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcastings. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we continue What If Tanjiro Had Venom, Demon Slayer Dark Fury, Part 3. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm J-Ron Harrington with Power Core Productions and Podcastings. Signing off, and I'll see you next time.